Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining us today for our Ask Me Anything event focused on preparing for peak traffic events. If you have any questions today, we would love to hear from you, so please feel free to add those into the YouTube chat and we will be sure to get to them either in the chat or live at the end of this session. My name is Lauren, and I'm a content manager on the Google Cloud community team. Joining us today is Min Chung, a Google Cloud technical account manager, who will be leading us through the content today. Do you mind introducing yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Lauren. Hey, everyone. My name is Min Chung. I also go by MC. And as Lauren mentioned, I am a technical account manager here at Google Cloud. My primary focus as a TAM is to be the customer's technical advisor and to also ensure reliability and stability of their environment. My background is in SRE and DevOps engineering. So peak events are something that I've had to manage in the past and have helped many customers prepare for.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We're happy to have you here today and to help answer some of our questions around peak traffic events. So what we'll be covering first is what are peak events, peak event stages, and then planning, preparation, and execution. So before we get started, just a final reminder, please feel free to add your questions into the chat. And for any that we don't get to, we will follow up with you in the community. And we'll also have a recap post in the community, including this recording, additional resources, and answers to your questions. So with that, I will hand it over to you and you can take it away with our content.
Great. So let's start by defining what are peak events. Some businesses serve a significant amount of traffic during their peak season, and these businesses mainly are retail and commerce industry holding massive sales during Black Friday and Cyber Monday, in addition to possibly Christmas and New Year sales. So it's not just limited to retail though. We're also seeing other industries see a massive spike during New Year's Eve, election events, and other holidays, as well as significant amount of traffic due to a viral marketing campaign. These customers often ask us, how can we better prepare to handle these events? So we should first define the traits of what a peak event is. Increased traffic from 5 times to 20 times greater with generally a higher conversion rate and greater loads on backend systems. A rapid scaling over a short period of time, especially at the start of the event, and then trailing decrease in traffic back to normal levels. The decrease is usually slower than the scale to peak. So the graph on the bottom right shows an example of the QPS during a peak event for Black Friday and Cyber Monday. You can see that at the start of the event, traffic ramps up and peaks in a significantly short amount of time to 5 times the average load. As the event continues, it tapers out a little bit before the next sale for Cyber Monday with another peak. Then traffic decreases gradually following the end of Cyber Monday. The good news is that building your application in the cloud gives you a greater advantage in handling these peak events. Cloud native systems are elastic and scaled to meet your changing demands. This doesn't mean, though, you can just host your application on the cloud and it's immediately ready to serve your peak event. This just makes it easier to prepare, but there's a lot of work involved to making sure your event runs smoothly. Planning and execution of an event can be broken down into 3 stages: planning, preparation, and execution. I'll quickly review the high-level topics for each stage, and then we'll dive into the details in the following slides. We start with the planning stage. This is where you define your objectives, review your architecture, plan your capacity requirements, and build your plans and checklists. We then move on to the preparation stage, where you update your architecture, do your load tests, and make adjustments as needed. As the event kicks off, this is your execution stage, where you'll be monitoring your event, reacting as needed, and once the event is complete, perform your postmortem. Start with data collection to understand what is expected of your upcoming peak event. Ideally, it's best to use existing measurement data from a previous event and cross-reference that with business data to determine if the event will be similar in scale or there may be changes that may increase or decrease the expected amount of traffic. With this data, you can then define metrics to measure against your desired SLI. You want to also connect performance metrics to user satisfaction and business success indicators. Work with the business team to understand the projections. So a few of these example metrics that you can get from them is the number of visits expected, the number of conversions, as well as average order value. You take these numbers and then you can translate them to estimate your system projections into queries per second, orders per minute, or cart adds per second. And then finally, you can convert these metrics into SLIs and SLOs to measure system behavior to indicate your system's health. Next, you want to establish your event program and align the necessary teams that should be involved. These normally includes developers, engineers, architects, ops folks, leadership, as well as third-party vendors such as your cloud provider. Establish a regular cadence meeting to keep all teams informed on progress, right? These calls are great forums to call out areas of concern before they become serious blockers, as the timeline can't be pushed back. If these regular calls are too frequent for your leadership team, you may also want to consider creating an executive summary document that you can share out regularly. In addition, set up or validate you have the necessary monitoring and probing metrics. So for network metrics, you can track latency, requests per second, error rates, and network saturation. For system metrics, you can track VM statistics such as CPU and memory, cluster metrics such as cluster utilization, cluster capacity, and pod level utilization. And for managed services, tracking QPS, RPS of APIs. And as mentioned, business metrics is equally important, right? So tracking revenue, orders received, marketing campaign schedules, social media metrics, and site analytics. You can use the monitoring metrics as mentioned earlier to capture SLI, and then use SLI to measure SLO. Just to define what SLI is for those that don't know, SLI stands for Service Level Indicator, which is a metric to determine if a service is within acceptable bounds. So an SLI for a page load time can be loading everything in your web page, including all underlying API calls at the 95th percentile. While SLOs, on the other hand, stand for Service Level Objective, and this is defined using an SLI and a target objective. So an example can be that latency for a web page must be below 400 milliseconds. And capacity plans are another important thing to consider when you're scaling up for your event. Cloud infrastructure is often shared by many customers, and there's a high chance other customers will be hosting their own peak event during your event. So by understanding and collecting your systems and business load requirements, you can then determine how much server capacity is required to serve your customer at peak traffic. So with this information, you can share your requirements with Google, and this makes sure that you have the reserved capacity for the time of your event. Some important metrics that customers often share with us include the number of virtual CPUs or cores, required machine family, series, and machine type, amount of disk storage required, and for APIs, you can look for QPS and RPS requirements. Your event will most likely have a lot of moving pieces with specific individuals and teams accountable for executing at specific times on the event. As cliche as it sounds, creating a checklist will help all teams involved understand where they fit in the event and what they're responsible for. It'll also help prevent any errors and result in consistent execution. And with any major event, there will always be risks involved. Identify them and determine acceptable risks and share them amongst the team and leadership so everyone can agree on them. And if possible, create a mitigation plan for these risks. At Google, we can also help guide you through planning and preparation for an event. We call this event management service. So if you're a premium customer, you can reach out to your assigned technical account manager who can help create a plan and provide guidance. This is not just limited to premium customers though. So if you're not one, you can reach out to your sales manager or field sales representative and have professional services team that can help as an engagement. So moving along towards the end of the planning stage, you want to also consider making sure that your architecture is ideal for scaling for the event. It's recommended that you review your design architecture with all teams involved so everyone knows how each component interacts with each other. And you should also review the data flow architecture and dependencies. So this can help teams cross-collaborate when troubleshooting a problem. I also highly recommend you review architecture frameworks, reliability, and performance optimization pillar documentation. It provides prescriptive guidance on design principles and best practices, which align pretty nicely with peak events. So some of these examples include, using caching systems through your architecture, um, using a CDN to offload serving static content, as well as if you're connecting to your on-premise data center, making sure that you're using multiple interconnects or an HA configured Cloud VPN setup. Lastly, for the planning stage is to plan for the worst and create a failover strategy for the major components of your infrastructure. Some of these examples can include how to handle a regional failure. What happens when your caching system fails and you still need to serve at peak traffic demand? How would you handle a CDN failure and how would you mitigate that? Network attacks, latency issues, third-party services. These are some of the things that you should consider and build into your plan. So in the unlikely event it occurs, you have a plan on what to do. We next move on to the preparation stage. So to validate some of the things you worked on in the planning stage, you have to ensure your systems are reliable and can take on the necessary load for your event. This requires you to simulate the load. So this is where load testing and performance testing comes in. You want to simulate your load tests to 100% or more of your expected peak traffic. You also want to simulate the velocity of the traffic from normal to peak so you can mimic the expected traffic patterns. This is also a great opportunity to simulate failover strategies such as a zonal or regional failure and practice your mitigation plans through tabletop exercises. You can also simulate different load mixes, mobile versus desktop, requests from different geographical locations, and also different transaction types to stress test the different components of your system. Evaluate and test failure scenarios that you came up with in the planning stage. And Google SRE principles also talk about something called DIRT testing, disaster and recovery testing. This is to create fictitious outages throughout parts of your system and test how effective your teams are able to react and respond to them. So based on the architecture review you performed in the planning stage, there will most likely be changes to the architecture that you need to perform in order to get ready for your event. This is a stage where you'll be applying those changes. So a few changes you might want to consider introducing a queuing and messaging broker to your architecture to make it asynchronous. This can help reduce potential overload on your backend systems if you have an overwhelming amount of requests coming in on the front end. Implementing caching across all layers of your architecture, right? CDN for front-end static caching, back-end caching, utilizing memory store, integrating an API that can take advantage of response caching. You might also want to consider implementing load shedding. This is where you prevent overload to your systems by throwing away some requests and making the client retry. And then implementing a circuit breaker pattern across your systems for it to continue to function regardless if some components may have had problems. You want to set up your dashboards to monitor important metrics that you define in the planning stage. So ideally, this would be single systems with a shared dashboard for all teams to monitor. Configure alerting and notification to notify the proper teams or individuals. And also meet with Google to review and submit your capacity plans. So if you have a technical account manager assigned, you can work with them to review your plan and validate that capacity will be ready for you. And if you don't have one, you can always reach out to your sales representative or submit a support case with those details. And once your capacity plan is finalized and submitted, then make sure to also commit the necessary reservations and quota limit requests as needed. So as you continue to prepare, you should review and update your checklists and playbooks. Conduct any necessary training on support escalation procedures from these playbooks. You can think of them like fire drills where you can practice how to respond to certain situations. So if it happens during your live event, the teams will be well versed on what to do. And always set up your operations team for success. It takes a lot of effort to prepare and support an event, and some of these events can go all day and night for multiple days. So make sure you develop an on-call rotation schedule for the support and ops team to reduce burnout. And then ensure there's a backup plan if any critical team members get sick or they're tied up focusing on an issue. Sometime before your event, you want to make sure to set up and communicate a change freeze window across all development and ops teams. So a change freeze window will stabilize your environment and help reduce the risk of errors and disruptions. Make sure to align this across all teams though, and make sure that the stakeholders agree on a last deployment date and time. Align with all teams and stakeholders in terms of change freeze as well as vendors. And then also check with your cloud provider to see if there'll be any major changes being rolled out for any critical services you're using. So before your event, it's recommended to scale up manually. Although you may have auto scaling configured, there's a good chance because of the velocity of traffic for the event, auto scaling is not going to be able to catch up with demand. Pre-warm your resources ahead of time. So this can be virtual machines, loading up your caches if you want it to be preloaded, pre-warming your serverless components to prevent cold starts. One thing to notice though is that GCP load balancers do not require pre-warming, but if you're using multi-cloud, check with your other cloud providers as some require load balancer pre-warming. Set up a virtual war room between all teams and vendors so there's an instant communication channel for updates and progress. If you run into any problems, leverage an incident management process and respond by executing your playbooks and plans. For any cloud-related issues, work with Google support and loop in your technical account manager for additional support. If you're opening a support case though, make sure to include all the relevant information so the support engineer has what they need to begin troubleshooting. So include details such as what project is impacted, what time frame did you notice the problem, any specific logs or identifiers, and location of impact can be critical information to provide. After your event concludes, it's recommended to conduct a postmortem, regardless if everything went smoothly without any problems. It's important to document what transpired and ways to improve for your future events. So start by reviewing the timeline, speak with what went right, what went wrong, what could have been improved. If you ran into any problems, identify the root causes and assign tasks to make sure that it can be mitigated in the future. Analyze your traffic predictions versus your actual traffic you recorded, and then communicate the postmortem report with all stakeholders and action on the tasks identified. Finally, acknowledge success as it took a lot of time to plan and execute across multiple teams and contributors. Celebrate the win and consider even taking some time off to recharge. So this is an example timeline for a Black Friday event at the end of November. And as you can see, planning actually starts in the beginning of August, which gives you as much as 4 months before the event to prepare. If you add that with the scale down and postmortem, you're looking at 5 months just for a single event. So it's good to start now, and then hopefully by the time Black Friday rolls around, you'll be readily prepared. We covered a lot during the session, and this isn't like a one-size-fits-all plan. I would build your plan based on your circumstances and adjust as needed. But what's important, or most important though, is to always plan ahead and give yourself enough time to prepare. So with that said, thank you everyone for listening in. I'll hand it back over to Lauren where she'll cover how you can get more resources on some of the things we covered today.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that presentation and content. Just seeing some questions in the chat around getting this resource on demand. So wanted to reiterate that this will be shared in the Architecture Framework community, which you can find at that top link here on this slide. So we'll share the recording, additional supporting resources, and answers to your questions in written format, so you can refer back to them at any time. That second link there is a link to the Google Cloud Architecture Framework documentation. So this is your holy grail of information where you can find architecture framework resources and best practices and recommendations based on the Google Cloud best practices. And then lastly, we'd love to hear from you. If you appreciated the session, have any feedback or ideas for future sessions, we'd love for you to fill out that quick form and let us know so that we can continue to make content that's valuable for you. All right, so we will start with questions that have come in through the community already. So if you have any additional, please feel free to add those into the chat, but we will start with those from the community. So here we have, my observation is that the classic HTTP load balancer has a performance problem connecting to computers in the EU at some hours during the day. Most of the time, this happens during peak business hours in the US. I do not observe this slowdown with the managed HTTP load balancer. So 2 questions are, is there any way to fix this? And then if no, is it possible to upgrade from the classic HTTP balancer to the managed HTTP balancer without interrupting service or having minimal interruptions?
Yeah, so this question sounds like it may need further troubleshooting from our support team, but before you open the case, I would first check if your classic load balancer is configured using our premium network tier. So by default, the new managed load balancers only support the premium network tier. So it's going to be utilizing our fiber backbone for communications, while the previous load balancer had an option to select a premium versus standard tier. So if I were a betting man, I would guess maybe when you first configured it, you configured it with the standard tier. You would just need to kind of go back into the configuration and recheck that. With that said, I don't think, if that's the case, I don't think it's possible to update your classic load balancer front end configuration from standard to premium. You may need to configure a new front end, which unfortunately will change your IP address. And to answer your other question about the possibility to upgrade from classic to manage with minimal downtime, the answer is yes, but not in line, right? Which means you might have a little bit of a downtime. What I would do is bring up a new managed load balancer with a new IP address, and then attach the same instance group that you had attached to your classic load balancer to that new load balancer. And then from then, you can add the new load balancer IP address to your DNS record. And then from then on, it's going to kind of round robin your IP addresses from the old to the new. I think there's a new feature that recently came out called weighted round robin. So if you want to do incremental tests, you can set up like a small weight for the new one and then slowly ramp up. And then finally, when you're ready to fully kick over, just remove the old IP address, the old load balancer IP address, and then traffic should be 100% on the managed load balancer.
Awesome. And it looks like, I believe this may be the person who asked the original question, but just to confirm that both balancers are on the premium tier. So thank you. All right, our next question is, how can I see my quota? And if I'm about to hit a quota limit, how can I increase specifically Google Drive API quota?
So yeah, Google Cloud has a dedicated quotas page where you can see all your quota limits for your project in a single page. It's normally filtered by quota consumption, so you're going to see the most utilized quotas on top. I would also recommend, for like specific quotas you're concerned about, set up an alerting policy. So you can monitor the quota, and then if you're close to hitting that quota, then it'll notify you so you can action upon it. For the second question, you can request the quota limit increase directly on the quota console. For this particular quota API, though, you'll need to log on to the console using your Google Workspace super admin account. And then from then on, you filter the quota list to Google Drive, and then enter the specific QPS amount you're hoping to achieve, and then try to make that edit. Another best practice I would also recommend is to build retry logic into your application for exponential backoff. That way you ensure that you're not constantly hitting and exceeding your quota limits if you were to hit them.
Awesome. Thank you. And we just dropped a link to the viewing your quota in the console link, so you can check that out directly. Okay. So So I'll just summarize this question, but we're using a WordPress for a site that is going to have a high traffic. We expect an initial load of 500,000 page views a month and will increase to about 8 million page views a month. It'll be mostly read database with a few writes. We are thinking of using Google App Engine with Google Cloud SQL, but not sure how well it scales for that kind of load. Any recommendations?
Yeah, so it sounds like you'll need to scale to about 16 times your current load and only during specific times of the day. I think this is a perfect example of how Google Cloud's elasticity can help you scale up and down, and you only pay for what you use, right? So you mentioned App Engine. I think that's a good starting point because that's a quick way to get started. You might also want to consider using GKE for greater flexibility and portability using containers. Both options should give you the availability to autoscale your front ends to meet the traffic demands. In terms of your backend database, you mentioned Cloud SQL. That can work too. It sounds like it will be read heavy or very read heavy database. So consider making sure you're using read replicas. So that way you can offload your read queries from your application to the replicas. And then from there, you can get a little more fancy. You can start developing backend caching services using memory store, or even consider using like a messaging queue to prevent your database from being overloaded. And I would also make sure you implement a CDN caching to cache static content, as well as to making sure that content is being served closer to your user base. There's a lot of details about this actually in the architecture framework documentation. Look under the performance optimization pillar, and you can kind of review that for best practices for scaling.
Awesome. Cool. Okay. I think we just have a couple more questions from the community. So let us know in the chat if you have any others. Okay. I have a multi-tenant consumer-facing app running on Cloud Run. Each of our customers has an existing website with their own domain, and I need to send all the traffic to the same server. The issue we have is adding SSL certs for each of these new domains. Are there any solutions within Google that would allow for having 1,000 or so domains running through one load balancer? The traffic to each of these sites is low enough that adding load balancers for each would be very expensive.
Yeah, so it sounds like you need a single load balancer to serve more than one domain, and you need them to work with SSL. It should be possible, and I would definitely not recommend you use a single load balancer per site, because as you mentioned, it would be super expensive. You first want to make sure you're using the layer 7 HTTPS load balancer. And for SSL certificates, you may want to consider using what's called a multi-domain SSL cert. This is often referred to as a UC SAN certificate, where a single SSL cert can have more than one domain. I'm not sure what the domain limit is per UC SAN, but from what I recall, it's about 250. But with 250, you can add up to 15 SSL certificates per load balancer. So that should give you more than over 1,000 domains to host all those sites in a single server.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay. All right. I think this is our last one. For a week or so now, our company has experienced frequent insufficient resource errors. Just to be clear, these requests are for basic VMs. We have also not hit any quotas. Is there any way to have more visibility into the resources available in a given zone?
Yeah, so depending on the time of day or week, and then obviously machine family or types, you may occasionally experience like a stock out when you're trying to spin up resources. This can happen especially during high traffic times throughout the year, like peak season, Black Friday, Cyber Monday being one of them. And it sounds like you've already reached out to our support team and they've given you the recommendation to try different zones and regions. This is something I would agree to. It's often best practice to build your application to take advantage of Google Cloud's distributed data centers. This helps with increasing availability as well as reliability. And it also gives you access to more capacity across our data centers, right? So, definitely try different zones, different regions, different machine families, machine types, machine series. Uh, Unfortunately, it's a trial and error. One thing I would also recommend would be to utilize our reservation feature. So by reserving your resources you require for each zone, it ensures the resources will be available to you when you want to launch it. And then your question about having more visibility into resources in a given zone. There isn't a feature available right now, but I'm happy to take this feedback to our product team and let them know. But if you do have a technical account manager, though, you can also reach out to them, and they should be able to provide you a little more details on our available capacity across the different regions and zones.
Awesome. All right. Well, there are no other questions that we haven't addressed that I see in the chat. So again, if you have any additional questions, please feel free to add those into the community and we will be sure to get back to you. And yeah, thank you so much, MC, for this session and all the information that you've shared, and everyone for joining us. Do you have any final thoughts or closing recommendations for everyone?
No, that's pretty much it. I appreciate everyone jumping on. And as mentioned, Black Friday, Cyber Monday is closely approaching us, and this is the perfect time to get started if you haven't already done so.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And we will be in touch in the community until next time. All right.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.